My wife saw me at the company party years after the divorce, and she couldn't hold back her tears. She stopped there, in the middle of the room decorated with golden lights and fake smiles, as if time had frozen. Her eyes, the same ones that once told me that I was everything, were red, teary, suffocated by the pain of something she herself created. She cried when she saw me, but not because of longing. He cried because there I was, whole, alive, stronger. There was the man she destroyed, and who was now reborn in front of her. She came to me, her hands shaking and her voice muffled, trying to smile, trying to justify years in a sentence that started with, "I didn't know you were coming," and ended in an awkward silence. Her excuse was weak as the promises she made to me years ago. She came to try to win me back, but there was no room for regret, there was the stage for my silent revenge. Just as she was about to ask me to talk, the new woman in my life appeared. Beautiful, serene, self-assured, as if she came out of a painting made to provoke the past. She approached me, gave me a light kiss on the cheek and smiled at her ex as if she already knew everything. The ex turned pale. Her hand let go of the glass she was holding, and the glass shattered on the floor, as if it symbolized everything she had lost. And at that exact moment, she realized that she was no longer the woman in my life. That it would never be again. But she didn't know, nor did she suspect, that this would be just the beginning of true hell. What she didn't know, what no one there knew, is that I didn't just move on. I prepared. I planned every detail. Every step of my ascension, every word I saved for the right moment. While she exchanged me for someone else, justifying the betrayal with phrases like, "I'm confused, I need to find myself," I was building the most painful silence of my life. I was betrayed not only in body, but in soul. And the worst part is that I still loved her when I found out. Love kept me going for days without eating, nights without sleeping, months without living. I saw the man she cheated on me with wearing my shirt, sitting on the chair in my house, eating from the plate I bought, lying in the bed where I dreamed of having children with her. Don't forget that. It is not forgiven. This marks itself on the chest like a red-hot iron. And it was there, at the height of my suffering, that I decided I wouldn't let it define me. If she broke me into 1,000 pieces, I rebuilt myself with each piece. If she destroyed my self-esteem, I made her the foundation of my new life. And with each advance, with each achievement, I kept her memory as a reminder of where I no longer wanted to be. I moved on, but I never forgot. And at that party, she felt firsthand what it was like to be left, forgotten, exchanged for someone better. And me? I was at peace. But what no one there expected, and what she never imagined, was what would come next. The highlight of the night. The moment I prepared for years. When the master of ceremonies called me on stage for a small tribute, she was still drying her tears, thinking everything was over. She believed the worst was over. But it was there, amidst the applause, that it all began. She stood, half smiling, thinking I was going to talk about her, justify myself, say that I was still thinking about her. But what I did was different. What I did no one would do. I didn't speak. I showed. The lights went out. A screen lit up. And there, in front of everyone, co-workers, friends, investors, relatives, even her new boyfriend, the video began to play. A video that I edited myself. That I gathered for months in silence. The beginning was smooth, photos of us, happy moments, trips, birthdays. The entire hall sighed. She, moved, touched her chest with trembling fingers, thinking it was a declaration of love. But then the transition began. Slowly, the happy images gave way to audio. To saved conversations. Prints of messages between her and her lover, while I was traveling for work. Security camera videos. Intimate conversations, dates that coincided with the days she said she was sick. Shame washed over her face like a tsunami. The audience, previously smiling, was now silent in shock. And she just sat down, unable to breathe properly. Every second of that video was a stab at the lies she told us all. At the end, a message: this was the woman who betrayed me. And this is me now. Never underestimate who you destroy. The hall erupted in murmurs. I walked off the stage with my heart pounding, but at peace. Because there, for the first time, I felt that justice had been done. Not for the courts, but for life. Not by words, but by evidence. She left the party in tears, staggering, humiliated in front of the world. And yet, that was just the beginning of what destiny had in store for her. Because her real punishment was yet to come. The social downfall was just the prelude. The real tragedy for her was hidden where it hurt most, in her reputation, in her guilt, in her regret. And what impresses me most is that to this day, even with everything I revealed, she continues to say that it was a mistake, as if a mistake lasted for months, as if a mistake involved desire, lies, manipulation and lack of regret while everything was comfortable. And now, she's looking for me. Call, send messages, try to find ways to talk. She says she's sorry. He says he made a mistake and that he still loves me. But she never loved me, loved what I stood for. The name. The security. The stability. And when he found something newer, more exciting, he didn't hesitate to let me bleed alone. Now that you've seen that I was not only able to move forward, but to flourish in ways she never imagined, come back. But I am no longer that man she destroyed. Today, I am the reflection of the pain she caused, transformed into strength. And the most curious thing of all, what most consumes my mind every night since that party, is that, she didn't watch the video until the end. Left early. Ran. But if she had stayed for 5 more seconds, she would have seen the last scene. The one that shows the true secret, what no one expected, what changes everything. What would make even the coldest of hearts shatter. Because in that last scene, there's the detail she forgot. What she never thought I knew. And that's why to this day I wonder, what would she have done if she had watched until the end? Welcome to the channel. Here, no form of cheating is romanticized or supported, on the contrary, our stories are a reminder of how much infidelity can destroy lives, homes and hearts. All narratives are fictitious, but they carry emotional truths that mirror the real pain that many have felt. Get ready to dive in an intense, painful and surprising story. Take a deep breath, because what's next will mess with you. They met in a simple way, as many stories begin, but they lived as if they were unique in a world made just for two. Ethan and Olivia first crossed paths on a muggy September afternoon at a corporate event at a convention center, where the two had been scheduled to represent their respective companies. He is the operations manager of a technology distributor, always with an elegant posture and an eye for detail. She is the communications director for a multinational cosmetics company, known for her natural charisma and the engaging way she told stories even in budget meetings. When their eyes met during the coffee break, there was no explosion, no exaggerated sparks. There was something rarer, recognition. A comfortable silence that filled the space between two strangers who seemed to already know each other from other lives. The first contact was casual, a conversation about how long the coffee line was, but the way she smiled and the way he listened changed everything. In the days that followed, the two began exchanging professional messages that quickly evolved into personal conversations. Before long, Ethan was eagerly waiting for Olivia's next joke, and she found herself looking at her cell phone just to see if he had sent something. When they finally went out for dinner, initially under the pretext of continuing a business conversation, they knew, without admitting it, that they were already involved in something that went far beyond a simple professional affinity. He spoke calmly, measured his words, observed more than he said. She was light, gestured a lot, laughed loudly. The contrast between the two was what made the fit perfect. Ethan brought stability to Olivia's creative whirlwind, and she injected color into his methodical, controlled world. The courtship was almost noiseless. The families met quickly, their friends approved without reservations, and soon they were living together in a spacious apartment, with large windows that let the sun invade everything, including their intimacy. The routine between the two was built on small kindnesses. He left handwritten notes on the bathroom mirror with phrases like, "Today is a good day to love you more," and she reciprocated with her improvised dessert recipes, which often went wrong, but which he ate with pleasure just to see her smile. They divided their weekends between visits to the fair, marathons of old films and spontaneous trips. There were no grandiose plans, but everything was deeply intense. Life next to Olivia seemed to pulse. She made any ordinary place seem extraordinary. Ethan, in turn, was a man who valued silence. He liked to look through the books he collected, arrange the plants in the small garden they had on the balcony and take care of the details of the house with an almost ritual attention. It was he who planned, inch by inch, the assembly of the apartment. "I wanted everything to be functional and beautiful, not out of vanity, but because I believed that the home should be a mirror of the peace I wanted to experience." Olivia didn't interfere, she trusted him, and then she decorated everything with colorful paintings, extravagant cushions and objects from craft fairs. She said that the home was the reflection of two worlds living in harmony. And so they went, for years, writing their own routine with a rare naturalness. Their professional lives continued to expand. Olivia started to be invited to lectures, events, and columns in magazines. His name has become relevant in the area of branding and emotional marketing. She was admired, loved and often praised for her ability to connect people with stories. Ethan, always discreet, preferred silent recognition. He never cared about high-ranking positions, but he was the person everyone trusted to resolve any crisis. And that was enough. Deep down, he believed that a man's greatness was measured by the solidity of his choices and the way he took care of what was his, and Olivia, for him, was the most solid choice of his life. They were married in a small ceremony, just for family and close friends, in an open field in late spring. The simplicity of the party reflected the type of life they wanted, love without spectacle, complicity without exposure. The votes were written by hand. Ethan promised to take care of Olivia's storms without trying to control them. Olivia promised to never let the silence between them turn into distance. They were sincere words, spoken with teary eyes, and which brought tears from everyone present. It was a day without vanity, but with an abundance of truth. And for a long time, everything seemed to fall into place. Over the years, natural transformations came, new responsibilities, changes at work, plans postponed for financial reasons, and that slight transformation that time imposes on couples. But Ethan and Olivia remained united. They adapted to demands flexibly, and when they disagreed, they did so with care. He backed away before shouting. She took a breath before accusing. Their love wasn't perfect, but it was mature. They suffered losses, such as that of their first baby, in a miscarriage that silenced them for weeks. But they came out of it closer, even without being able to talk about the subject for a long time. Over time, they began to smile naturally again, walking hand in hand through the streets again, as if they were relearning how to live after an intimate war. Olivia had a charming presence. Wherever she entered, she attracted attention, not only for her striking beauty, but for her way of expressing herself. He had an engaging voice, an almost theatrical way of telling stories, and a spontaneity that made people open up in seconds. Ethan enjoyed watching her in these moments, like someone appreciating a moving work of art. He admired her in silence, smiled when he saw others enchanted by her. He was never possessive, he never made scenes. I trusted. He believed that true love does not require vigilance, just presence. There was a tradition between them. Every wedding anniversary, they chose a place to visit, even if it was a different park in the city. The important thing was to create a new memory. And on these trips, they talked about everything, about how they met, about what the children they didn't have yet would be like, about the dreams that seemed too small for the world, but were huge for both of them. In these conversations, Ethan always said that he only feared one thing: distancing without warning. The feeling that the other has left while still being present. And Olivia promised, looking into his eyes, that if one day she felt something strange, she would talk. I would always talk. But time, silent like Ethan, began to make its own adjustments. Some absences became longer. Messages began to be responded to with longer delays. Olivia started traveling more for work, and when she came back, she still seemed a little distant, as if a part of her had stayed somewhere else. Ethan tried not to worry. He attributed it to tiredness and the pressures of adult life. But something in him began to shut up too. Not out of giving up, but out of an attempt to preserve what was still there. I preferred not to ask, because I was afraid of the answers. I preferred silence to confirmation of an abyss. Even so, he prepared dinners, left notes, tried to revive the laughter that previously came easily. I wanted to believe that everything was just a phase. That it would soon pass. She, on the other hand, seemed increasingly restless. As if something inside her demanded more than she already had. As if everything they built together had become too comfortable a scenario for someone who needed adrenaline. Olivia was still kind, still saying, "I love you," still smiling, but the glow had changed direction. And Ethan, even though he tried to ignore it, no longer saw himself reflected in her eyes. At the company, he began to receive more responsibilities. A promotion put him in direct contact with senior management, and this required him to travel, make new contacts, and spend long nights in hotels. And in this new context, he began to realize that the absence was not just his. She began to notice that there were questions that Olivia no longer asked. That she didn't want to know how her meeting went, she didn't show interest in the new directions of her career. And yet, he insisted. Because I believe that love resisted. That when it is real, it survives the most arid phases. But there was something he still didn't know. Something that would change the way he saw not only love, but everything he had experienced up until that point. Something that was already happening and that, little by little, undermined the structures of the relationship. However, at that moment, he still believed. I still waited. Still loved. And it was with this hopeful heart that he accepted the invitation to be honored at the company party, without imagining that that event would bring not only memories, but revelations. And that, in the midst of so many lights, smiles and rehearsed speeches, the truth would come to light in such a devastating way, that it would transform the past and the future at once. The invitation to the party arrived with pomp, one of those emails that open with golden fonts and words like "Annual Celebration" and "Tribute to Outstanding Leaders," accompanied by an institutional video with an inspiring track and close-ups of clasped hands, corporate smiles and surpassed goals. Ethan looked at it with a certain laziness, but also with the lightness of someone who, little by little, began to feel that he deserved recognition. The new phase of work was demanding, but it took him out of the shadow he had lived in for years. The board chose him as one of the names that would be honored that night, among executives, partners and high-ranking employees. It was the kind of occasion where Olivia would shine. She always had a taste for parties, for sophisticated events, for her natural elegance that meant no one dared to ignore her. But strangely, when he told her, she reacted with little enthusiasm. He said he didn't know if he would be able to go because of a work trip, which might be delayed, but he would confirm closer to the day. Ethan felt uncomfortable, a small pang of frustration that he tried to ignore, rationalizing that her schedule, as always, was busy. Over the next few days, he noticed something different at home. The silences between the two were longer, but not tense, just empty. Ethan arrived tired, she was on her cell phone. He talked about meetings, she responded in monosyllables. He tried long kisses, she offered short hugs. Intimacy seemed to have become a mechanical ritual, as if they were fulfilling an emotional contract that had already expired. But what hurt most was the absence of fights. There were no arguments, no accusations. Just a silent disconnection, as if the relationship was being dissolved delicately, without noise, so that neither of them would notice until it was too late. One night, after a 3-day trip, Ethan came home and noticed that something had changed. It wasn't a concrete absence, like a misplaced suitcase or a piece of clothing that disappeared from the closet. It was the smell. Olivia's perfume, which always permeated the sheets, the sofa, and the hallways, was now different. It wasn't yours, nor his. It was stronger, more invasive. He thought about asking, but swallowed the question. He went to the shower, let the water run over his shoulders, trying to convince himself that it was just paranoia. In the following days, this feeling of being out of place in one's own home intensified. He felt like a visitor. She, on the other hand, was more excited. She started wearing different clothes, putting on makeup for virtual meetings, smiling alone on her cell phone. He watched from afar, trying to find a rational justification, something that would calm the hole that was growing in his stomach. Then came the 5-day trip. She announced that she needed to go to a convention in another state, related to a partnership with an international brand. Ethan offered to help with the suitcase, but she refused, saying everything was under control. When she left, he felt absurdly restless. He tried to immerse himself in work, occupy his mind with spreadsheets and contracts, but at night, the bed seemed too big, too cold. On video calls, she was always in a hurry, saying she needed to go to a meeting or dinner with the brand's representatives. He tried not to show it, but the look in her eyes didn't lie, there was distance. And it wasn't just physics. It was emotional. On the 4th day, while clearing the history of his own corporate notebook, Ethan accidentally came across an automatic login saved in one of the browsers. It was an old backup of Olivia's phone that had been synced months ago. It wasn't his habit to look into his wife's life, but something that night made him click. Maybe the desperate need to understand what was happening, maybe the fear of imagining things, maybe the simple hope of discovering that everything was just a bad phase. But that's not what he found. The messages were there. Hundreds. They began with pleasantries, evolved into tender phrases, then into intimate photos, explicit exchanges, vows of desire and precisely scheduled meetings. The schedules coincided with the trips, the lack of appetite, the silences. Every line of that dialogue was a stab that he read with his eyes transfixed. The other man's name was repeated several times, always in intimate tones that Ethan had never heard from Olivia's mouth. She called him a refuge, a necessary adventure, said that with him she felt alive. I read everything without being able to process it. The pain came in waves, increasingly violent, until he felt his body shaking, his stomach turning, his chest burning. But he didn't cry. Not yet. He stayed there, hours on end, absorbing everything in silence, like someone watching their own life unravel, without being able to intervene. That same night, she called, as if nothing had happened. She said she was tired, that the meetings were long, that she missed me. Ethan responded with a controlled tone, trying to keep his voice steady. He said he loved her and was waiting for her. Olivia hung up without suspecting anything. He, in turn, walked to the bedroom, opened the closet and stayed there for a few minutes, looking at her clothes. Didn't do anything. Didn't break it, didn't throw it away. He just watched, trying to understand when he lost the woman he loved. On the last day of the trip, he decided not to talk about what he discovered. Not yet. I needed time. I needed to understand what to do with that newly opened hole. In the following days, he began to observe her with a different gaze. Every gesture, every word, every distraction, everything was analyzed in silence. And the more he saw, the more he confirmed what he already knew, she was far away. Kind, smiling, but distant. As if she lived two lives and, alongside him, played a role that no longer made sense. Then came the night of the party. Olivia confirmed that she would be able to go, that she would arrive a little later. She said she wanted to see him receive the honor, that she was proud. Ethan looked at her for a few seconds before responding, trying to find some trace of the woman he knew in her eyes. Didn't find it. Just a perfect, cold, trained mask. On the day of the party, he arrived early. He wore a tailored suit, a trimmed beard, a calm expression. But inside, it was war. He walked through the corridors of the hall as if he were inside a theater where all the roles were reversed. He received greetings, handshakes, enthusiastic smiles. But everything seemed to echo far away. His mind was elsewhere, waiting. She arrived later, wearing a dark blue dress that had always been his favorite. He approached with the same charming smile as always. He posed for photos, praised the decoration, and smiled at his colleagues. He looked at her and wondered how many lies could fit into a smile. The night progressed with speeches, toasts and presentations. Ethan was called to the stage. He heard complimentary words about his leadership, his ethics, his contribution to the company. He took the microphone and thanked us calmly. But I didn't say everything I wanted to. It wasn't time yet. After getting off the stage, he walked towards the makeshift bar, grabbed a glass of wine and went to the back balcony of the room. There, I felt like I could breathe. Olivia followed a few minutes later. The two stood side by side, looking at the illuminated city. She praised his performance and said he seemed more confident, stronger. Ethan glanced at her sideways. I wanted to ask if she was speaking sincerely or if she was just pretending. But he remained silent. She laid her head on his shoulder, and for a few seconds, he closed his eyes. I wanted that gesture to be real. I wanted time to go back. But time doesn't come back. And the words that had been accumulating inside him began to find their way out. With a low, firm and direct voice, he asked, "Do you love me?" Olivia, surprised, took a while to respond. I said yes, of course I did. Ethan then asked if she was happy. She hesitated. He said he had happy moments. He didn't insist. He just looked into her eyes and said, "I know." Her expression changed. The eyes widened slightly, the lips parted as if searching for an answer. But before they could ask what he knew, they were interrupted by an announcement on the microphone, calling everyone back into the room for one final surprise. They walked back together, in silence. Olivia fixed her hair, touched up her lipstick, while Ethan looked at the screen that now dominated the center of the room. The final performance was about to begin. Everyone sat down, anxious. The lights went out. A video began to play. And in that moment, everything would change. But what would come later was still hidden, ready to explode. The lights in the room went out completely, plunging everyone into an automatic, almost reverent silence. A beam of light appeared in the center of the screen, revealing Ethan's face in an old photograph, an image of him in his early years at the company, with the shy look and discreet smile that had always accompanied him. The following sequence of images began to show his professional career, successful projects, meetings, trips, awards. Soft instrumental music filled the atmosphere. Olivia, sitting between executives and partners, kept her hands clasped in her lap, eyes fixed on the video. The composition seemed to be just a common tribute, like so many others they watched together over the years. But she still didn't know that this wasn't just any tribute. I didn't know I was about to witness my own ruin. The video continued for a few more seconds until the transition changed. Images from Ethan's career gave way to personal moments, photos of his childhood, his adolescence, his family, his wedding to Olivia, trips, dinners, genuine smiles. The guests sighed. One or the other murmured something like, "How beautiful," or, "They were perfect together." But then, without warning, the screen went dark again. The sound stopped for 2 seconds. After that, a new image emerged, a screenshot of a conversation between Olivia and an unknown man. The visible words were simple but devastating. "You make me feel alive like he never did." Murmurs began to emerge. Some looked at each other, others leaned forward, confused. The music was now tense, swelling. Another capture followed, then another, then a short snippet of video, Olivia entering a hotel lobby, smiling, next to the man. The date on the footage was a month earlier. More prints, more short videos, more smiles that didn't belong to Ethan. The hall was plunged into a state of collective shock. She brought her hands to her mouth. The wide eyes seemed unblinking. Breathing was accelerated. The face, previously illuminated, now exuded fear. Humiliation oozed from every pore of her body, and with each new image, each new message displayed, her soul seemed to shrink another inch. When the lights came on again, silence remained. Everyone looked at Ethan, who was slowly getting up from his seat. The microphone was already waiting for him in the center of the stage. He walked with calm but steady steps. Once there, he took a deep breath and looked directly at Olivia, who couldn't hold his gaze. He said that night wasn't about revenge. It was about freedom. She said she spent years trying to understand where she had failed, trying to heal a wound she pretended not to see. He said he would no longer remain silent. That betrayal wasn't just marital, it was existential. It was the slow murder of everything I believed to be real. When he finished, he returned the microphone and left the stage without looking back. People remained static, as if reality had become too dense to process. Olivia stood up slowly, shakily, her eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding any eye contact. He tried to leave discreetly to the side, but some people were already whispering. Others recorded, others just watched with expressions confused between pity and judgment. Outside, he found Ethan alone, standing in front of a hall mirror. He approached with hesitation. The voice was weak. He said he didn't know he had kept all that. Ethan replied without turning around. I didn't keep it out of revenge. I kept it because no one would believe it if it was just me saying it. She tried to touch his arm, but he backed away. Don't pull over. Don't try to justify yourself. It's past time for explanations. She cried. He said he had made a mistake, that he didn't want to lose him. He then turned, with a steady gaze, and replied that she hadn't just lost a husband. She had lost a home, a man who chose her when no one else saw her, and a story that was only real for one of them. But she still didn't know everything. I still didn't know what Ethan had guarded most carefully. When she said she just wanted a chance to explain, he took a deep breath. He said the video wasn't over. That there was one last stretch. And that she should have watched until the end. Olivia widened her eyes, not understanding. He then took his cell phone out of his pocket, opened a file and placed it in front of her. She immediately recognized the image that appeared. It was her, recorded from behind, talking on the phone with someone. The words, however, were the real impact. She said that she was with Ethan out of convenience, that she no longer felt anything, that she needed to keep the marriage going until she could resolve a financial issue linked to his company. And the most devastating thing, it said that Ethan's new business partner, a recently hired executive, was, in fact, one of the friends with whom he shared everything, and that together they had devised a plan to monitor his steps and control his finances, to prevent him from discovering the hidden transfer that she herself had initiated months before, using his name as collateral. Olivia went pale. He tried to mumble something, but couldn't. Her body lost balance for a moment. Ethan kept his arm crossed, his eyes fixed on her, as if he were facing a stranger. He just said that he had discovered everything 2 weeks earlier, that he knew about the betrayal, but had not imagined the coup. That it was the new executive herself who alerted him. That the evidence was handed over by someone who could no longer bear to see him being manipulated. Olivia fell to her knees in the middle of the hallway, as if the floor had disappeared. He cried compulsively. I asked for forgiveness. He said it had been a mistake, that he didn't want to take it that far. But Ethan, with the serenity of someone who had already died inside and was reborn later, replied that the problem was not betrayal, but coldness. The plan. The calculation. He said that love is taking risks, but using someone for convenience is more than lovelessness, it is cowardice. He walked away. She tried to follow him, but was stopped by some colleagues who, embarrassed, tried to restrain her. Ethan crossed the lobby to the exit and, as he passed through the main door, he saw the executive standing outside, waiting. They exchanged a silent look. She nodded, and he just said, "It's done." They got into the car without a word. In the distance, Olivia's screams still echoed. That night wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of a cycle built on lies, conveniences, and manipulations disguised as affection. What began as a love story ended as a cruel lesson on how far someone can go when they stop loving, and how much rebirth can come from those who decide to stop accepting crumbs and finally choose the truth, even if it hurts. But what would happen after that car left, no one expected. Because the past is costly, and some truths were yet to come. The car continued along the silent avenues as if it were gliding under the tension of that night. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, even when he wasn't behind the wheel. From the passenger seat, he seemed absent, immersed in layers of thoughts that overlapped at speed. The executive next to him, Julia, drove in silence, respecting the space he still needed. She didn't ask, she didn't console, she didn't give her opinion. It was just there, with the firmness of someone who understands that some pain does not need to be welcomed with words, but with presence. The city lights passed through the windows like shapes, and the entire city seemed less real than the memories that scrambled in Ethan's mind. The party was over, but the weight of what had been revealed that night still vibrated in the chest like a continuous echo. Julia broke the silence only when they approached Ethan's building, asking gently if he preferred her to leave him there or accompany him to his apartment. He hesitated for a second, then asked her to come up. He needed to talk, he needed some anchor for that reality that seemed to have slipped from his hands. The elevator rose slowly, with an irritating hum that had never bothered him so much. When they entered the apartment, Ethan took off his jacket and threw it on the couch. He walked to the balcony, opened the glass door and breathed in the cold early morning air. Julia followed him and stood a few steps away. He turned slowly, leaning against the railing, his eyes fixed on her. He asked if she had predicted that everything would come to this point. Julia answered honestly, not exactly like that, but she knew the castle was going to collapse. He said he could no longer keep his conscience clear knowing what Olivia had been doing, and that handing over that evidence was an act of respect, not revenge. Ethan nodded silently, not because he agreed, but because he understood. He knew that Julia had not acted out of spite, but rather out of a sense of justice that he himself had abandoned long ago to try to keep the marriage going. Dawn advanced, and they talked until the sun began to touch the horizon with orange tones. At some point, Julia took off her shoes, sat down on the living room floor, and Ethan followed her. There, on that cold floor, between confessions about the lies that had surrounded them for so long, something faint began to emerge. It wasn't romance. It was relief. It was the meeting of two people who had survived the same storm, still wet, still freezing, but standing. When Julia finally said goodbye, Ethan didn't try to stop her. She hugged him, a firm hug, with no hidden intentions, and left, leaving in the air the impression that, perhaps, something different was beginning there. In the days that followed, the video of the party almost inevitably went viral. Someone had recorded the entire sequence with their cell phone, and even without authorization, the images spread across groups, networks, channels. Ethan avoided notifications, but he knew everything had become public. Olivia, in turn, had disappeared. He didn't respond to emails, didn't return calls, didn't show up at the company or at home. Her lawyer got in touch days later, asking Ethan to accept a confidential and amicable settlement to avoid further exposure. Ethan refused. He said he wasn't looking for a scandal, but he also wouldn't protect those who destroyed trust with such calculation. He said he wouldn't put a hot cloth on other people's dirt to preserve an image that was never true. Then, one rainy night, she appeared. He knocked on the apartment door with his eyes swollen, his hair tied up carelessly, and the hunched posture of someone carrying guilt. Ethan opened the door without surprise. She asked for just a few minutes, promising not to be dramatic. He relented, either out of curiosity or out of respect for the story they shared. They sat facing each other at the dinner table, like two witnesses to a crime they both knew well. Olivia spoke weakly, avoiding his eyes. She said she didn't know how she got to that point, that life had consumed her, that she hadn't planned everything as it seemed. Ethan interrupted. He said he knew how to distinguish weakness from premeditation. What flaws he would understand, but that was strategy. That she didn't betray him out of desire, but out of convenience, and that hurt more. Olivia tried to justify it with insecurities, with the pressure to succeed, with the need to feel in control. He listened, but was not moved. At one point, she asked him to say something. Anything. I needed to hear from him if there was still any remnants, any chance. Ethan took a deep breath. He said that perhaps the cruelest thing about it all was the fact that he no longer felt angry. That she had not only destroyed love, but also hate. That what was left was a void, and that was the end of everything. Olivia cried. She said she didn't want to lose the only person who truly believed in her. Ethan then got up, went to the bookshelf and picked up an envelope. He placed it on the table. It was the formal divorce petition, signed, with all the terms. He said she could take it with her, sign it and return it whenever she wanted. That their past was in there, reduced to clauses and values. Olivia didn't take the envelope. He kept looking at it, as if he didn't want to touch the concrete symbol of an end that he still didn't accept. But Ethan didn't insist. He said he had already closed that chapter within himself. That the pain no longer needed final scenes. That night, after she left, Ethan sat on the living room couch for hours. He didn't think about revenge, he didn't harbor resentment. I only thought about time. In the time he gave, in the promises he believed in the words he heard that now made no sense. I thought about how someone can change so much without the other person noticing. How it is possible to share a bed, plans, dreams, and still live such different stories. And I thought about Julia too. In her eyes, in the firmness with which she spoke the truth, in the way she was by her side without asking for anything in return. He thought maybe it was time for a change. To rebuild not only the routine, but the identity. To look forward without carrying the weight of rebuilding what had already collapsed. 2 months have passed since that night. The divorce process progressed, finances were separated, assets were redistributed fairly. Olivia followed in silence, moving away from everything. Ethan returned to work, but with new eyes. He started taking more care of himself, traveling on his own, reconnecting with friends he had left behind. Little by little, I felt that my heart was beating at a lighter pace again. Julia appeared from time to time. They exchanged messages, quick coffees, some walks. There were no promises, no urgency. There was presence. And that was enough for now. Then, one morning, he received a message from her. It just said, "Are you ready for the next chapter?" There were no emojis, no ulterior motives. It was an honest question. He looked at his cell phone for several minutes, then replied with a simple, "I think so." He got up, put on his coat and left the house. As he opened the door to the building, daylight hit him hard. But it didn't bother him. It was a new light, as if the world had found some color again after so much gray. And if, in the past, he was betrayed with well-told lies, now he knew how to recognize the difference between real affection and a poisoned caress. And he also knew that no one would ever steal from him the right to start over. No more. The game had turned. But what he still didn't know was that destiny, that old silent playwright, still had one last unexpected act to be revealed, when you least expected it. The morning after the last exchange of messages between Ethan and Julia, the world seemed to have slowed down, as if the universe had understood that after so much turmoil, it needed a break. The sun streamed through the apartment window like a delicate intruder, spreading light into corners that previously seemed darker than they really were. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, in front of an almost cold cup of coffee, staring at an undefined point on the floor. For the first time in months, there was no noise inside him. The silent chaos that used to take over his thoughts gave way to a kind of uncomfortable neutrality, the emptiness that comes after the storm and before any reconstruction. There was no euphoria, no sadness. Just the naked clarity that nothing he had experienced in recent years would ever be what it was again. Time moved on, and he knew that, whether he liked it or not, he would have to move on too. He got up, put on a light coat and went for a walk, something he hadn't done in a long time. The streets were calmer than normal, maybe because it was Sunday, maybe because, finally, he was ready to see this calm. The steps were slow, the gaze attentive to details that previously went unnoticed. Children running on a sidewalk, a man watering plants on the porch, a couple arguing quietly inside a car. Life was happening around him as it always had, but now, it seemed to have regained its colors and textures. It was no longer just a sequence of days to be faced. It was as if existence itself was offering him a new chance to observe, to connect, to rebuild without rushing. In the following weeks, Julia remained present. He didn't invade his routine, he didn't demand answers, he didn't demand promises. He appeared as someone who respects other people's time and understands that, before love, there is care. The two began to meet more frequently, often in silence, other times between discreet laughter and scattered confessions about traumas and old dreams. With her, Ethan felt something rare, freedom to be vulnerable without fear of appearing weak. He could talk about his pain without needing to dramatize, and she listened attentively, without offering cheap solutions or ready-made advice. It was a bond that grew organically, like a plant that finds fertile soil after being ignored for too long. He was in no rush to label what he felt, but he knew it was real. However, not everything was resolved. Olivia had disappeared from her routine, but not from her mind. Some nights were still marked by insomnia and involuntary memories. Her face appeared in confused dreams, fragments of happy scenes mixed with images from the night of the exhibition, creating an emotional contrast that hurt. It wasn't longing. It was mourning. Ethan didn't miss her as a woman, but as an idea. As a project. It was goodbye to a version of himself that he needed to kill in order to continue living. As much as he knew that everything they lived had been corrupted, there were still remnants of a life that couldn't be destroyed with a click or a signature. And he knew that, at some point, he would have to face this last ghost. Formal closure had taken place, but the emotional scar had not yet completely closed. This opportunity came unexpectedly, one morning when he received a letter with no return address. Upon opening the envelope, he immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from Olivia. It wasn't a long letter, but it carried a weight that Ethan felt on his shoulders when he read the first line. She said she was out of the country, staying at a distant cousin's house, trying to find herself again. He said he was not looking for forgiveness, because he understood that what he did crossed the line of reparation. But I needed to explain something. Something he didn't have the courage to say in person. And then, at the end of the letter, he left a phone number. Ethan stood there with the paper in his hands, feeling the world spin in slow motion. I could just ignore it. Tear up, erase, move on. But something in him, perhaps the need to end the cycle for good, compelled him to call. The call was answered on the second ring. Her voice on the other end of the line was hoarser, maybe from crying, maybe from time. There was a long silence before either of them spoke. It was Olivia who broke it. He said he didn't know if he deserved that call, but he needed to tell the truth about something he held back, even when everything came to light. Ethan remained quiet, his heart racing but his breathing controlled. She went on to say that during the years of their marriage, there was a pivotal moment when everything started to fall apart, not just out of dissatisfaction, but out of fear. She said that she once discovered that Ethan had received an offer to move countries and take the company to another level, and that he had turned it down without even telling her. That he chose to remain there, stagnant, and she felt like she was being dragged into a world she didn't choose to be in. That silent gesture made her feel trapped, invisible, and that was where she began to distance herself emotionally. Ethan heard this with a mixture of surprise and confusion. He didn't remember this exact situation, but he recognized the behavior. Yes, it was something he would do. Giving up on a proposal to keep everything as it was, for fear of taking risks. For wanting to protect what they had. He explained, his voice quieter than he would have liked, that he never saw it as a unilateral decision, but as a way to protect what he thought they valued together. Olivia replied that perhaps their mistake was this, protecting too much what was in ruins. Pretending stability where there was only silence. Maintaining appearances where there was no longer real affection. The call ended without rancor. No promises. Only with a collective sigh from two people who finally managed to say what needed to be said. Ethan hung up the phone with a strange peace in his chest. It wasn't forgiveness. It was understanding. He didn't forgive what she had done. I didn't forget the manipulation, nor the cold use of the love he offered. But he understood now that the mistake didn't start with betrayal. It started much earlier. It started when they both stopped being who they were and started playing roles to maintain an illusion of happiness. And as cruel as it was to acknowledge that, there was relief in that realization. Life went on. Slowly, with the firm steps of someone who no longer carried unnecessary weights. Julia and Ethan continued to meet, now with more intimacy, more exchange, more naturally. They knew what they wanted, but were in no rush to define it. They started traveling together, enjoying weekends without plans, rediscovering the pleasure of an uninterrupted, unfiltered conversation. Ethan no longer felt guilty about smiling. I didn't feel afraid of liking someone again. Because now, I understood that love is not about keeping someone by your side for security, but rather walking with someone who chooses to be with you, even though they could leave. But the moral dilemma still visited him sometimes. Especially in the quieter moments. He wondered if he had gone too far in public exposure. If the video revelation, so harsh, so calculated, had not exceeded the limit of what was necessary. If, in his desire to show the truth, he had not become an inverted mirror of the coldness he hated so much. Julia once asked this, gently, as they walked together by the sea. He stopped for a moment, looking at the waves that came and went, and replied that he was still thinking about it. That I didn't know if I would have done the same thing if I could go back in time. But he needed to free himself, and at that time, that was the only way he could find. Julia didn't judge him. I just said that, sometimes, freedom comes with scars, and that the important thing is what you do after you breathe again. Ethan knew he was on the threshold of a new phase. That the worst was over, but that reconstruction would require maturity and humility. There were still memories, there were still marks. But there was also space. Space to start over with dignity. Space to love without fear. And he was ready for it. Ready for whatever came. Because now, for the first time in a long time, he was the one writing his own story. And this time, it would be a true story. A story that, even with flaws, would be written with courage, with presence, and with real love. Time passed like the seasons that we don't notice. The months following that phone call were marked by an invisible and constant transition, where every gesture, every silence and every choice was a slow, silent, but deeply intentional reconstruction. Ethan, who once walked the streets like a man observing the world from inside a cracked bubble, began to touch the things around him with more presence. His gaze no longer carried the weight of the past, but the awareness of what he had experienced. And this awareness, even though it was painful, gave him a strength he had never had before. He was no longer the same man who begged for answers, nor the one who blamed himself for not seeing the signs. He was now someone who knew what he deserved. And more than that, he knew what he no longer accepted. Julia, in turn, not only occupied an emotional space in Ethan's life, but also became part of his reality in a practical way. The two decided to share some professional projects, which brought them even closer. She admired him, not for what he had achieved, but for the way he chose to pursue it. Ethan, on the other hand, saw something rare in her, truth. And true, for someone who was betrayed where he trusted most, it was the purest form of seduction. There were no games between them. What they felt grew slowly, with deep and solid roots, without fanfare, but with intensity. They laughed together, discussed ideas, shared fears, but never trapped themselves in suffocating expectations. They were two marked, reconstructed adults, ready to try something that was no longer a simulation of happiness, but a real construction, even with flaws. One late afternoon, while they were returning from a meeting in another city, Julia suggested that they take a detour on the way back. She knew a small coastal village that, according to her, seemed to have stopped in time. Ethan didn't hesitate. When they arrived, they were greeted by an almost cinematic scene: simple houses, stone streets, the smell of sea air invading the senses and the constant sound of waves hitting the rocks. They rented a modest chalet, with a balcony and hammock, and decided to spend the weekend there. It was in that simplicity that Ethan felt for the first time, clearly, that he could love again. Not like before. Not with the same naivety. But completely. With presence. It was a more serene love, without urgency, without expectation of healing, just sharing. One night when the power went out, the two had dinner with makeshift candlelight, cheap wine and honest conversation. And there, with the sound of light rain on the roof and his bare feet on the cold ground, Ethan looked at Julia for long seconds before saying, "I don't need you to save me anymore. I just want you to stay." And she stayed. The return to routine was peaceful, but soon a new element brought tension to everyday life. A legal letter arrived at Ethan's company, asking him to provide clarification about a movement of values made in the name of the old company, linked to Olivia. That caught him off guard. Although the divorce had already been formalized, it seemed that some remnants of that life were still pulling him back. He went through all the documents, contacted the lawyers, and discovered that there was an investigation into unauthorized transactions that had been made years before, while he was still a director. The problem is that part of the authorizations had been given by him, based on information manipulated by Olivia. None of this made him guilty, but it would require explanations and involvement in a process that he believed he had already left behind. Julia stayed by his side the entire time. Not as a partner who wants to protect, but as someone who knows that presence is not synonymous with interference. She respected his limits, but supported him with a constancy that made a difference. Ethan, in turn, decided he would no longer remain silent. If the past still pulled at him, he would face it. He sat down with lawyers, handed over documents, looked through old emails, talked to former colleagues. All to prove that, although he had signed authorizations, he was never aware of the real intention behind them. The legal team was clear: he was not at risk of criminal punishment, but he could be named at hearings as part of the process, and this inevitably reopened wounds he was trying to let heal. At one of these preliminary hearings, Ethan saw Olivia for the first time since their final meeting. She was visibly different. The hair is shorter, the eyes are dim, the expression is heavy. He didn't exchange a word with him. He just maintained his formal posture, responding to the judge and lawyers with mechanical sentences. During breaks, Ethan watched her from afar, trying to identify in her traits of the woman he once knew. But it was useless. That wasn't the Olivia she used to be. And perhaps, he reflected, she never had been. Maybe he just projected onto her what he wanted to see. At one point, when they were both alone in the court hallway, Olivia approached with hesitant steps. She said that she didn't want to fight anymore, that she recognized her mistakes, but that she couldn't bear the idea of seeing him involved in a scandal for something that she herself had created. Ethan didn't respond right away. After a few seconds, he just said that what hurt him most wasn't the lies, but the certainty that, even after everything, she still believed he could keep quiet for her. Olivia looked down, and for the first time, he saw something like genuine regret in her. But it was no longer enough. In the days that followed, Ethan was released from the case as an innocent party. Investigators confirmed, through documents, that he had been manipulated. Justice, little by little, did its work. But that wasn't what brought relief. Relief came when, one ordinary night, he was sitting on the couch with Julia, reading in silence, and realized that he was no longer waiting for new beginnings. I was already living one. He was no longer a man in recovery. He was a man on the move. That he had survived what many would not have the strength to endure. That not only rose, but transformed. Who learned not to beg for love, not to justify absences, not to romanticize crumbs. And there, with the sound of Julia's calm breathing next to him, he understood that forgiveness is not forgetting what was done to you. It's freeing yourself from the need to keep this alive inside your chest. Ethan forgave. Not to ease Olivia, but to free yourself. He forgave not with words, but with choices. With the decision to continue without hate, to love without rushing, to live without hiding the scars. Because they told a story. A difficult story, yes. But a real story. And he was ready to finally write the ending. The end came like a silent tide, without making a fuss, but carrying with it everything that still remained loose. Ethan was now walking on a completely new road, and even with the memories still lodged in some cracks in his mind, he was no longer haunted by them. Pain had turned into learning, hurt had turned into discernment, and resentment, which once burned like an uncontrollable fire, had been replaced by a nobler and rarer feeling, peace. It was a peace built with effort, sweat, long nights of silence and unanswered questions, but it finally made sense. He knew the price of each step he took there. And now, with his eyes facing forward and his feet firmly on the ground, he could finally close a story that began with love, got lost in lies, and ended in the most painful and necessary release. Olivia took another path. Away from everything that once supported her socially, emotionally, and professionally, she spent months searching for herself. She tried to re-establish family ties, but was received with distrust. He tried to rebuild his career, but his name had become synonymous with scandal in the corporate world. The doors closed, not just because of the exposure, but because, deep down, people felt the weight of his arrogance, the coldness with which he manipulated situations for his own benefit. What was once charm now sounded like falsehood. What once sounded like persuasion now sounded like calculation. One day, waking up in a small apartment rented with the help of a distant cousin, Olivia looked around and realized that there was no one else with whom she could share coffee, silence, or even memories. The apartment was clean but lifeless. The walls seemed to whisper everything she was and everything she lost. And, for the first time, she cried without defending herself, without putting on makeup, without expecting comfort. She cried because she understood that her mistake was not just betraying the man who loved her most, but betraying herself by trying to live a life based on appearance, on control, on the power she thought she had over people. As for Julia, she remained. But not as a prize or a replacement for the void left by Olivia. She remained because she built, with patience and consistency, something that no storm could take away. He never demanded love in exchange for presents, he never demanded space that was not offered to him spontaneously. And with this firm calm, she became an essential part of Ethan's new reality. They did not get married immediately, nor did they rush their fate. They continued living together, growing together, respecting limits and celebrating small but significant achievements. Julia opened a new company, focusing on human development and business ethics, and Ethan became a strategic advisor. The two now dedicated time and energy to helping other people leave toxic relationships and environments with dignity and structure. They turned pain into a mission. They made experience a pillar. They had difficult days, like any couple, but there were never again any lies, manipulative silences or disguised absence of routine. Everything was exposed, said, shared, including fears. And that, more than any declaration, was love in its most mature form. A year after their final separation, Ethan received an unexpected invitation to speak at an event about emotional resilience. At first, he thought about refusing. He didn't see himself as a lecturer, nor as someone willing to revisit everything that happened. But Julia encouraged him with a simple argument: sometimes telling the truth is the ultimate act of freedom. He took the stage with a firm heart and a sure voice. He spoke without victimization, without hate, just with truth. He talked about love, about deception, about forgiveness. He said not every marriage that ends is a failure, some are victories in disguise. And that, sometimes, pain comes to push us away from where we should never have been. The audience rose to its feet. There were tears, hugs, long applause. But, above all, there was identification. Because everyone there, on some level, had already been betrayed by someone, or by themselves. At the end of that night, Ethan and Julia walked down the street hand in hand. He looked at her and said there was something curious about pain, it shapes us, but it doesn't define us. Julia smiled, agreeing. The two stopped in front of a small cafe that was still open, went in, ordered 2 coffees, and sat down side by side. They didn't talk about the past. They made no plans for the future. They just stood there, sharing the gift, knowing that that was all. Outside, a light drizzle was beginning to fall. But, for the first time, no one cared about what came from outside. What mattered was what was inside, and there, at that moment, everything was in place. And, if this story touched you in any way, comment below what you felt. What did you think of each character's fate? Which part moved you the most? Your opinion is very important. Take advantage and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more stories like this. And never forget, this channel does not support, encourage or romanticize any form of betrayal. We are here to show that the truth can hurt, but it can also liberate. Until the next story.